Hey, I'm Anne Cocquyt, and in this show we bring you the most inspiring stories from female entrepreneurs, investors, and innovators in our ecosystem, the Guild community. And welcome to the Guild Show today with Vi Nguyen. She is the founder and CEO of Homads, and I'm super excited to welcome her here today because she's been an entrepreneur for a while, but she's also been a digital nomad before she founded her company, Homads. And so before we dive into all the questions around the startup, I would love to learn from you, Vi. How was it being a digital nomad and what did that journey look like?
Thank you so much for having me. Prior to starting Homads, which I will say was not a deliberate action, it very much was, I think I read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, right? And so I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm totally going to travel the world. And that was my passion, was to do that. And I did, right? I remember I was backpacking Europe, and with like a 3-month, I took like a one-way ticket to Istanbul, and then, which quasi Europe, but like, southern of it, and then went up into Greece and over to Portugal. And then I did my last leg just kind of on the whim. And that I liked a lot, was not really having to plan ahead, not having to be accountable to anyone, and having a backpack that I realized that's the only thing I need in this world right now, right? And it was really nice for quite a while, I would say, but there is something to say of like, it sounds so pretentious, but to say like you get tired of beaches and like tourist spots, and it's like, what's the point? I just got to a point of where it's not really that fun anymore if there is no purpose to life, right? Outside of just I'm enjoying this, but really what's the point of that? So I love it still, and I actually run Homads as like a remote first company, is because it makes sense to, not force people to come into an office if that's where the mindset came from.
Wow, that's so awesome. How long did you do that? How long did you travel and work?
Sometimes I still do that today because I can, right?
Of course.
And with COVID is also kind of interesting, is because it went very remote for everyone else too.
Right.
So then it's like, hey, I can really be anywhere as long as I have an internet connection. Back then I was managing video editors, so all I needed was a hard drive and my laptop. So I could be in a hostel, somewhere in Spain, and just work and, send out, edits, that sort of stuff, without really, anyone on me. And so I think I probably did that for about 5 years. Actually, to correct this, I'm not a true digital nomad, because digital nomads don't really have a home base, right? I have always had a home base. I just traveled extendedly in places.
Love it. Love it. And I love it too, because in 2008, which, is dating me a little bit, I did a round the world trip for a year and also worked and traveled everywhere. And it wasn't digital work at the time. It was, hands-on work, or I did some software implementation for some company in Australia, but was also park ranger at the time and just wanted to explore the world and travel. At the time, that was a new concept, right? Nowadays, it's very different. So many people do it. And also there's so many jobs that are digital that allow you to do that with just a laptop and not needing to apply for jobs at the location that you're at, right? It's just really cool. Is there any place that stood out, that left an impression, or that you love to go back to?
I have always loved Portugal. Although, now when you talk about the digital nomad scene, I think it's been like oversaturated with digital nomads. So they probably wouldn't want any of us there. But, I loved it. Is the culture there was just really, the people were just amazing, are amazing. And it was just also very easy as a digital nomad to navigate, right? You could get around. If you knew Portuguese, that's great. But if you didn't, they weren't, they were always welcoming about it. Just pricing and all of that. It just, in comparison to the rest of where I went through Europe too, I would say it stood out the most for me. And I have always wanted to go back, but it's also hard because there's so much in the world and you're like, do I go back to a place I've been or do I go to a new place, right? That's the big challenge.
It always is. Yeah. I'm a part of a community called Red Bridge, and it's a connection between San Francisco and Lisbon. And it's a community that John Lippman and Nathan Hadlock and a few friends of mine started. So I'm excited to see that actually flourishing and that exchange happening between those two cities and also countries with the two red bridges that both cities have, right?
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, now I'm connecting it.
So if you go back to Lisbon, you'll need to go to a Red Bridge event over there.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
So, okay, so you're a digital nomad, you're doing video editing work. Now, all of a sudden, or maybe not all of a sudden, but at some point you woke up and you decided, you know what, I'm going to become a startup founder and I solve one of these issues that I'm experiencing, which is short-term rentals. And Airbnbs are probably too expensive and hostels are just not quite right for what you want at that point in your life, I assume, right? And this is me assuming a lot of things, so please correct me if I'm wrong. Like, how did you take that step into starting Homads?
Yeah, for sure. So I believe it was 2014 when the idea started, which sounds very far from now. But I was actually in a hostel in Spain, and I remember so I was actually coming at it from a host perspective. And I thought, man, I'm managing short-term rentals while abroad. Like, I think our septic, maybe TMI, but our septic was overflowing into the house. And it was like, you got to get a plumber in on the weekend is high pricing, and you got another guest coming in. And so it's like, and the time zone change, right? So then I was like in the middle of the night in a hostel on a call with a whole bunch of plumbers. And I was just like, this would never have happened had I had a guest that was in longer, because they would have told me signs, right? Like, hey, the water's a little weak. These normal things that you would normally get from, like, let's say a tenant, right? Or you would hope so. And I was like, I'm just going to start doing midterm rentals. There's got to be something out there. And I started searching and I was like, how is this not out there? Like, why is no one doing something like this? What I will say in hindsight is I came in with a very naive perspective of it. It was, but necessary, because I would never have actually started a startup had I known how hard it was. It's the truth, right? It's because like, I remember we're like several months in and I was like, I guess we're a startup. Like, it didn't even like dawn on me. I thought it would just be like a portfolio, like, hey, it'll just cost me $3,000 to build a website. That's how much like a portfolio company costs, right? Or like, if I were doing like a video portfolio or something. And then I talked to a few friends, like it was this early level. I had nothing to do with tech, nothing to do with real estate, except for having a property, right? And I went to a friend in college and I was like, you did computer science in college. Does that mean you're a developer? Like that really was my mindset, right? So very, very naive in some ways, but I'm grateful for, one is the people I met. That friend also was the person that built out my full MVP, right? And guided me and helped me find the right developers throughout the many years of Homads, and still is someone that helps me today, right? You're early, especially a non-technical founder. That's one of the hardest things, is because you don't know what to watch for. You don't know, how to scale your team. Now I know a lot because I was able to slowly learn it through them, right? But yeah, I would say that the early stages of it I was not aware of what I was doing.
Well, and thankfully so, right? Because otherwise, as you said, you wouldn't have done it. And I think that's a journey that a lot of entrepreneurs go through, where you just see a need and you're trying to solve it. And on that journey, were there any tools that you found really helpful as somebody who was a non-technical founder and now is a technical literate founder?
Yeah, for sure. I think I definitely needed to take the time to understand what the actual foundation of traditional development look like, right? Even the processes of it, right? Because you can, I will say, even if you just stick with traditional development, if you understand how it works in the process there, you can manage a team, right? You manage a team relatively easy as if you can build a team that like works well with you. Which I also see is an issue sometimes with non-technical founders is it doesn't always translate. Like the worst thing that I learned to never say to my development team is like, this is easy to do, right? Like no one wants to know. They're like, well, there's so many factors in this, right? So now I get it once I started building more on my end. So it was one of the biggest problems we had is, so we were bootstrapped, you know, for the most part. And then eventually we found angel investors throughout. But even then it wasn't like a lump sum of angel investors, like slowly throughout. So you can never plan ahead. So we worked with, you know, our internal team and then had contractors that came in on development. And already, if let's say you're a funded company, I still feel like getting development to meet where you are on sales is always off, right? Oftentimes you're overselling and then hoping that development will catch up. Ours was even way worse because we were bootstrapped, you know, trying to get people who had full-time jobs to work. I mean, they're all working middle of the night, right? Our calls were middle of the night whenever we would have stand-ups. And essentially what I realized was throughout all these years, I just cannot move fast enough. It just wasn't working. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna shut this down. I can't run it this way. I've had my headspace into this and it's not moving the way I want it to. And it's making me unhappy. And at the same time, I was trying to pitch another concept to investors. And I told my CTO, hey, let me just do a clickable prototype. And I don't want to bother you. You continue building the features we need. I'm just going to do a clickable prototype. And I got into Nocode. And at some point I was like, wait, this isn't just a clickable prototype. I can actually like run things off this. And it was kind of like that small part was like my gateway drug into, you know, Nocode, because then I realized I can build a whole app. And so my last haul was like, you know what, I'm just going to rebuild everything. So Nocode has a typical ratio of 1 to 5. So meaning if you spend your 1 to 5 in how much money you spend, meaning Nocode is 1 and then 5 times, right? Or it's in duration in that it would take 1 month to 5 months. And for me, I was building it myself. So I saw it in duration. I built everything that we had originally built over several years, I think 5-6 years, right? In 1 month. And when I say 1 month, I'll say it's like maniacal, like 15-hour days. I get into that mode. Yeah. And so I did that, and my CTO was like, you know, hey, it's a lot, you know, and he's full stack, but a stronger on the back end. And he was like, there's just a lot going on the back end. Like, I really want to take a call with you before, you know, we transition and migrate over to a new database. And so I walked him through and demoed it, and he was just like, oh my God, this is amazing what Nocode can do. And it's amazing that you did it, you know? And so I still have him in my back pocket if I really need anything, but I actually don't really need to talk to him that much because we then transitioned over using Nocode. And I've been very lucky to also be able to be involved with like specific agencies. Like for instance, I advise for Singular Design. They're like one of the leading ones for Flutterflow, which I love. So we're actually built on Bubble, which is a no-code platform, right? Flutterflow is very interesting. And how I look at no-code is it's certain stages at what you're at and scalability within all of that, right? And so we kind of know like, hey, we're going to have to go likely to Flutterflow based on like certain infrastructure where we're at. But you would never do that with traditional development because it would cost too much, right? Like we were on Rails on the back end and Ruby on the front, and then we went to React. And we were still in process of going to React still when I rebuilt. It was like years of it, right? And so being able to jump ship over to another one relatively quickly, I think is a great skill set for early companies that are still trying to find product market fit. So that, I think that was our superpower, because we then started growing 20% month on month with our
Right.
listings. We started getting contracts with really like one of the largest real estate sites that's out there. We have a partnership with them. We signed a couple of months ago. Two of the largest insurance companies, we're doing a partnership agreement with them in this month. Never would have happened had I not been able to say, hey, let's deploy this next week, right? Who can do that?
Right. Yeah, it takes out so much friction of the process, right? You communicating the requirement, the team receiving them, implementing them, interpreting them, then implementing them, sending it back to you, and then you saying, no, this wasn't exactly what I meant, and then doing the whole cycle again. Now you throw some time zones in the mix, and it's a week, right, to get one field changed. Yeah, I hear you. I think that's amazing. Yeah, I always say to my clients too, try to do websites at the early stages of your companies that you can edit.
Yeah.
Because even just a slight change with pictures or even a tagline might change your conversion rates, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that was actually one of our big things, because we're a consumer, right? And so being able to just change your copy was something that we needed to do consistently and deploy to production. But then with traditional development, when I think the last, straw for me was, I was like, hey, you know what? I want to play with our revenue model. Let's change the numbers on there and then, do this. And he was like, oh, okay, that would take like a month. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I could just rebuild. So I just rebuilt it in a month instead.
Nice. Fantastic. Wow. That's exciting. Now, you just threw out a lot of different no-code tools. So no-code is a whole suite of tools. And of course, people need to understand what they can do in order to choose the right one, right? If you need an app with location features to know where your user is, it's probably, you won't be able to use Wix
right,
and their mobile functionality, but you could use Bubble, I guess. How did you learn about all the functionality and the tools that are out there? And are there good places where people could go to find out more?
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest struggles that I see people that I talk to, is understanding what to use it for, right? When you think about early stage startups, I'm really big about like early research, design thinking, idea validation prior to even building anything. Yes, we already had a product and everything, so that's why I rebuilt it to, replace what our existing product is. But if I were to start a new product, it is very much hey, how do you growth hack this, right? And so like no code doesn't necessarily even have to be like, hey, let's build a website. It could be, hey, I just want a landing page and I want to get enough analytics to that. Or, hey, I want to, growth hack social. How do I build a bot, right? There are so many tools on no code where it will, if you as a user on a website, if you as a human can do it, you can replicate that, through that. And so like some of my back end is, on Homads, where I'm like, what, I really don't want to build out that integration right now. It's going to take me 2 days. I'm like, this bot though, I could do this and do this all day. And so it's way not scalable, right? And so it's how do you utilize those tool sets? And honestly, there are two routes in which I go. One is, it really is, you just have to test it. So you have to have that mindset of, I'm going to learn a new software today, even if it's just diving in for, half an hour, right? The other part that I also, so, there are people that are like impulse buyers with like clothes or food or what. I'm an AppSumo impulse buyer. Like, I love AppSumo because it's like, how do I learn about the new tools, right? And their early stage life, like, subscriptions oftentimes. So it's a like good way to grow a business.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Fantastic. Okay, so you rebuilt the whole platform and it's for midterm rentals, you said, right?
Yes.
What is that exactly, and how is it different from, let's say, a VRBO, Craigslist, or Airbnb, where you would probably normally go to find those rentals?
For sure. I will say that, prior, when we started it in 2016, 14, somewhere around there, when we launched, right? it was really difficult for us to differentiate ourselves because it wasn't a thing. Like, we coined the term midterm rentals or medium term rentals. And now there are literally MTR conferences. It blows my mind all the time when I'm like, wow, we made up that word. And now there's like tons of people, right? But because of that, especially because these other players are like behemoths in the industry, it was very hard for us to raise money at the time because the nuances of short-term rental versus mid-term rental. And so the explanation of what it is anything less than 30 days is considered short-term rental. And that's on a regulatory standpoint too, right? Meaning you're paying hotel occupancy taxes, getting permitting. Anything after, depending on the state, is either 30 or 31 days. And then, you hit a year, that's your annual lease. So it's anything less than a year, longer than 30 or 31 days. You do fall into the landlord renter, laws that are there. And I think that's also why a lot of the short-term rental sites never really got into it until COVID happened. What no one anticipated, and maybe we knew a lot because we have been in this space for this long, is that it's close enough for like the host to say, it's furnished, all those paid, set up how I need it to be. But it's so different enough where they're like, we don't know what to do. Do we have to do a lease? Do we screen tenants? Do we, what's the protocol on this? And that's still something that's emerging today where people are asking, like, what is a typical rate? Who do I market to? It's not travelers anymore, right? And then also different from the investor standpoint in that they thought, well, you have Airbnb, VRBO, they'll just times 30, right? And then you'll have a midterm rental. What they didn't realize is now you have a 20 grand rent, a month. Like it doesn't translate. The mindset of a host that does midterm rentals is very different of a short-term rental. So you can't just throw money at it and hope that it'll translate, right? It had to come organically. And so all of ours are very much single family homes that are in like second tier growing cities. Not your like, condo downtown kind of mentality, right? They're not hopping to like the best bar or anything. They're like, what's the school system here? Because I'm moving here, and I want my kids to go to that school.
I love it. Well, I'm moving back to the Bay Area right now, so I do need probably a midterm rental if we don't find something in the real estate market. Are you in the Bay Area already? Where are you located?
So we are actually globally, although we concentrate our efforts in the US. We do again better in that second tier growing city. So like Tampa, Atlanta, Austin, Austin's kind of like that midpoint where it's growing, but not there yet too. But of course we also do have things in the Bay Area. We started pivoting actually more towards the insurance focused side of it. Our platform, you're able to go as a consumer and saying, hey, I just need to find a midterm rental. You're still able to do that, but a lot of our concentration is actually bringing in the insurance side, meaning you lost your home to a fire, a mudslide, water damage, whatever. Insurance has to place you somewhere, right? And because of the timing of the market, it has now become a thing where these insurance service providers are having clients that are saying, I don't want to stay in a hotel for a month anymore or 3 months. I would like a home. And so now they're having to find demand or some supply, and they're saying, I can't find it with the existing, platforms.
Fascinating. Yeah, fascinating. That's so interesting. Wow. Well, okay, lots of milestones you must have achieved in the past to get here, and a few pivots perhaps as well. Can you tell us just briefly what the journey looked like, and maybe also sprinkle in a little bit of fundraising? And you already said you had some angels, but how did that look like? I know our audience always loves to know that.
For sure. So I will say, probably one of the hardest things was being too early to everything. It's just as bad as being too late, right? I was only working on Homads for like 20% of the time by the time the end of the year where I was about to shut it down. And I realized I was getting more traction doing 25% of my time than when I was doing like full time. That's all I was doing for many years. And I realized it wasn't my effort putting in, like, it wasn't like, oh, you're not working hard enough, right? It was just, I was working uphill, the timing was not right at all. And it made me realize very few things are really personal, right? Including fundraising, I think is very easy, especially as a woman, as a minority, and be like, you know what? I think it's because you can't let that get to you. I'm sure it happens. I'm very sure it happens, right? But sometimes it's just a bad business at the wrong time. It's like maybe a good business or any of those things. So I would say, what I learned too is our angel investors, they were all people who invested in, me, my team. Not so much the, hey, whatever you're pitching right now is going to be it, right? We hear it all the time, but it doesn't translate until you're further along and you're like, oh, I took many pivots, like so many pivots. And they're just like, yeah, we know that's going to happen. We assume that you'll just execute and get it done, right? So I'm grateful for the people who believed in me early on, because it's been a long route. I mean, I've actually told them all like, hey, I'm shutting it down too. Like they've gone on that roller coaster with me, right? And they're always wonderful, where they're like, hey, you've done so much, like that's okay, right? And that's the kind of investors you also want. Then, kind of moving forward to where we are today, it's then, oh, okay, now I'm actually hitting the traction that and the KPIs that make sense to talk to VCs, right? Fundraising today, a lot easier. And it's, some parts, again, timing, recession, very, very helpful versus whenever you're in a bull market, right? It's the, how big is your vision? All of these things, right? One of my advisors said, my biggest weakness is how pragmatic I am. And I think it's very true. Is like in a bull market, it was very, very difficult because they don't want to know like your profit margins and efficiency and how great is your run rate. Like they want to know how big is this going to get, because you got to be that 1 out of 19 or 20 or whatever, companies. But now in a recession, they're like, wait, what is the profit margin? Like you're actually efficient and you have like a path to profitability. We like you, right? And again, that's the point of like, nothing is personal. It's just the market. It's just timing. So I think that comes with a little maturity of being, in startups for this long and growing some tough skin to be like, well, okay, this isn't about me,
Yeah. And it's probably pretty good. And you have some awesome advisors on board as well.
For sure.
Amazing. If you could go back, now that you have the thicker skin, what would you tell your younger self?
I always compare like, fundraising and just meeting people, interactions with people very similarly to dating, right? Mm-hmm. Is like when someone's desperate, you can tell, And it's funny is because you can always, in dating or in business, you can tell yourself, okay, you don't need this, you got this. Like you can keep on telling yourself, but it really is just maturity. Like you can't rush it in some ways and you have to go through it, right? So like, even if I could go back and tell myself that, I already knew it logically. It's the emotional component of it. It's that safety of knowing, hey, I'm worth this. I know I have something of value. It's the confidence that you can't really tell yourself. It's something you earn, right? And I think that's I wish I could soothe myself back then, but I know if I told myself, I would just be like, I don't know. Like I would be too in my head. So I think that it's, if anything, it's at least some like validation of what you're going through is completely normal, right? Like you not knowing how to react with investors or partners or any of those things, clients, how to sell to people, how to learn how to sell. I hated sales, right? And then I realized there's ways in which you can authentically sell because everyone is selling, right? It's just those things are learned. And I think that's what's one of the hardest things is like, no, not that I'm a woman or a minority, is because I was a first-time entrepreneur. Those learnings are really hard, but they're normal, and that's why I think a lot of people have respect for entrepreneurs too, is because you get through that. We all have that camaraderie about it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And what you said about confidence, I think really hits home. And I think there's a cultural element and a societal element to confidence as well, where perhaps from a gender perspective, the men get a little bit more there before they hit the first startup and the women don't, right? And so perhaps there is a little bit of an inequality there in terms of like us gaining that confidence through experience rather than just societally being taught to be confident. But it's a big part, right? If you don't believe in your idea 200%, who else
Exactly.
would be? Amazing. Man, so much good wisdom, no code tools, naivete in the beginning, right? But then the confidence later. And of course, also recognizing that aligning what you're trying to build with the investors and what they're trying to invest in is really key, so that the KPIs that you track towards are the KPIs that the investors are actually looking for as well. And if that happens, now there's synergy, and now those meetings are happening and people get referred and your fundraising goes much faster, and you should almost pull back because you don't want to give up too much of your company, right?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's always a balance.
Thank you for sharing. And it was great to meet you at South by Southwest, which is how we initially met. And then thank you for reaching back out and saying, hey, I want to contribute to the community, which you are with your voice, with sharing your story so authentically. So I really want to thank you for that. And we'll share out about Homads. And if you have any company news ever, please feel free to share it as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you're inspired, then subscribe to our channels on YouTube, on our social media channels at Get Gilded, and also on our platform, letsgild.com. You can also sign up to our newsletter to get news about the latest and greatest in inspiring stories from female founders, entrepreneurs, investors, and innovators in the Guild. I'll see you next time.